Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, back with the D7000, and this time we're going to run through the menu system, how I think you should set it up, or how I would set it up, and what each function really does. The important functions, what do they mean, how do you change them, how do you get in and out of them, what can you do wrong, and all that good stuff. But if you didn't see the last video, which went through all of the buttons, explaining what each button does, not the fully technical aspect of it, but literally what each button does, what each setting means on the outside of the camera, click this box right here to go see that video first, then come back and watch this video on how to go through the menu system and set it. So now you turn the camera on. You have a menu, not a menu, but you have a screen up top on top of the camera that pretty much echoes everything that is in the camera that you will see. So let's start off by hitting the info button. When I hit the info button, it brings up a screen. It could be a light color with darker print, or a darker color in this case with white print. So that's going to vary. Actually, there it goes. It blinks in and out depending on the scene and what you are shooting and how much light is there. But as you can see on this, you can see a lot of different things. You can see you can change your, here is how to change your, what do they call this? Movie modes. So you can go into movie mode. I don't even want to get into this stuff yet, but I'm just showing you the different things on the back of the camera when you hit the info button. Let's hit the menu button and let's run through the whole menu system. So here's the playback menu. It's the one that looks like the sideways triangle. You have an option that says delete. Do you want to delete selected items? Do you want to select a certain date range and delete, or do you want to delete all? I don't understand this function. You either want to delete everything, which is, I would recommend reformatting everything, because reformatting is how you clean the card fully. It takes off all of that data that would have still be on there if you hit delete. So when you hit delete, technically the ones and zeros are still on the card, and you may be able to get those files back after you delete, but never delete in the camera. My recommendation is always leave the pictures in the camera, or always leave the corrections to be done after the fact on the computer. Don't delete on the camera, because the 3-inch screen, you can't always tell if it's a keeper or not a keeper. Now that's different if the picture is totally black or totally white or somebody walked in front of you. That's a different story. But here we go. We have the playback folder. It's just something I don't even get into because it's automatically gonna, you could change the name of that if you really wanted to, but it's D7000. That's the playback folder that it's going to read images from. Hide images, I don't do that. Display, when you click on the display and you click over is how you get through the menu system. Over, down, up, down, down. We went over that last time. It doesn't give you 30 extra men or 30 extra frames. So here is basic photo information. When you have a check mark next to this, this means that that information is going to show up when you're previewing your image. So when you're looking at your image, you're going to see where the focusing points were. That's important to see if your focus was right on the eye, or if it was on the nose or the ear and you missed. It's good to know that you can see your focus point during playback. Some of these items won't be selected when you first get into the camera. So to select it, you can hit the OK button, or you could hit the right button, which will then check mark it. Now, when you move down, to save that, you have to go up to done and hit OK, and it's going to reset the whole, take you back to the main menu. But there's highlights. That's going to be the white blinky things that show you if there's burnt out areas in your photo. RGB histogram, I personally do not use. And data. Data, I want to see what data is there, how I shot the picture. It's going to give me the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO. It's going to give me all the pertinent information. So those are the things I like setting: the focus point, the highlights, and the data. So in order to lock this in, I go to done and I hit OK, which is the center button. Copy images. This is if you wanted to copy images from one card to the next. It's an interesting feature. I've never used it in my D3S, but I could see it being used, if you have a bigger card or you just want to copy images to a second card just as a backup at the end of the day, you could do that, being that there are 2 memory card slots in this camera. Image review, I leave off. Choose whether to display new images in the monitor immediately after shooting. That's what it tells you. I don't want the screen turning on every time I take the picture. And it's not just to save battery, it's a distraction. You shouldn't have to chimp. Chimping means you're looking at each picture after you take it. You should be able to just keep shooting, because you don't want to always be reviewing your images, because that's how you miss those shots that you should be taking. So I leave that off. After delete, show next, or really not a very important setting. Rotate tall. What this means, if you hit the question mark button, is if on is selected, images taken with on select. God, could they write this any less Englishy? Or selected from auto image rotation in the setup menu will be rotated for display during playback. Images are not rotated for display in the monitor immediately after shooting. I have this off. I don't want it to rotate the image, vertical images on the horizontal screen, because then they look smaller. I don't mind turning the camera to look at my vertical images. Slideshow, skip that. And that brings us to the shooting menu. You can reset all of the options in the shooting menu, but storage folder, it's going to start at 100, and then I believe when you pass 9,999 photos, it's going to go to folder 101. File naming, it starts off at DCS. I leave my camera set to sRGB, not Adobe RGB, even though, you know, when you're shooting RAW, it doesn't affect your image. It's just more of a file naming sequence here, and I set my own name. I don't leave DCS in there. I put like JPA, so that when I pass 10,000, I go to JPB. But really, I'm renaming my files as soon as they get back into the camera, into the computer anyway, so I don't, you know, worry about the numbers, the naming too much. This is very important in this camera. Rolled play by card in slot 2. I wish it would have said roll played by the card in slot number 2, but it doesn't. So first option is overflow. This means you're going to fill up the card. If you fill up the card in slot 1, and the next picture that you shoot will go on to card number 2. So it overflows, so you don't have to stop and change cards. Backup. Backup means that whatever you take on card 1, or whatever saved to card 1, will automatically be saved to card 2. Now, if you put an 8 gig in slot 1 and a 4 gig in slot 2, it's only going to allow you to shoot 4 gigs of the first card. At least that's what it does in my D3S. Then you have RAW in slot 1 and JPEG in slot 2. If you really wanted to shoot RAW plus JPEG, you could do that. Sending the RAWs to 1 and JPEG to 2. I wouldn't personally do that. If you wanted to shoot RAW plus JPEG, I would still leave it on overflow at the least, and it's just going to have the RAW file and the JPEG file right next to each other. To me, that's not a big deal. Image quality is a big deal. How do you want to set it? Do you want to set it to NEF, which is RAW, JPEG fine, JPEG normal, JPEG? I leave it on RAW. RAW, just straight up RAW. For those of you who are new to photography and shooting RAW, you may want to leave it as JPEG basic, you know, RAW plus JPEG basic. That way, the basic file that you're getting is a preview file. You can email it around or use it as a reference file to try to, you know, to get your RAW file to where you think it should be. I still think it's better to edit your RAW file. You'll get it, you'll get it, I think you'll get a better file when you edit your RAW file than from your JPEG. So that brings us to image size. If you're not shooting JPEG and you're only shooting RAW, it's not going to be highlightable. But I would shoot it at the highest. If you're going to shoot JPEG and not RAW, then always shoot at the highest you can. JPEG compression. So size priority means all images are compressed to around the same file size. Images are going to be different file sizes depending on how many whites, how many colors, how many darks are in a frame. So the more detail that's in a frame, like the more textures that you're shooting, like carpets or tapestries or trees and greens and blues and skies and all, not skies. If skies are bright white, there's not a lot of detail. But the more detail in your images, the bigger your file size is going to be. In this case, if you do JPEG compression, it's going to make each one about the small, it's going to make each JPEG about the same size, which is a different form of compression. I'm not a big fan of that. For priority is given to image quality, so file sizes may differ. That's what I would leave it on if you're shooting JPEG. And then for NEF recording, I saw this in here. You have, I don't think you can turn off Can I turn off this? I think the only options you have for raw recording is lossless compressed or compressed. I want to shoot as uncompressed as possible. What happens when you shoot lossless compressed? It's compressing the file up to 20 to 40% smaller. Fully compressed is 40 to 55%, but you may be losing some data when you uncompress it. Also, when you compress a file, it takes longer to open it in the computer because it has to process it to uncompress it. So I want to use uncompressed as much as possible, but in this case, you have to use, I would say, lossless compressed. Now, here is the difference. You have 12-bit and 14-bit. 12-bit, it tells you it's going to create smaller files. 14-bit is going to see a heck of a lot more color. You're going to get the most amount of data out of a 14-bit file. If it's offering me to shoot at 14-bit, shoot at 14-bit, and this is only for when you're shooting in RAW. Shoot in the highest amount possible. That is really what you want to do. So next we go down to white balance. I leave white balance on auto because we are shooting RAW. I can tweak that later, and I'm not a proponent of saying tweak everything later, but when you are shooting RAW, this is one thing that I am a big fan of saying tweak later, because you have the full control of your white balance later on when you are done shooting. If you shoot JPEGs, you have less control of your white balance, so you may want to try to get it right in the camera in this case, but I recommend not setting that. So, or not taking it out of auto. So now we get into picture control. If you're a JPEG shooter, you want to set your picture control because it's going to allow you to make your image more vibrant, more neutral. Do you want it to be for a portrait or for a landscape? I leave it on standard because when you're shooting RAW, your file isn't affected by what your picture control is set at, but your preview on the back of the camera is. So what I do in picture control for my standard is I bump up my sharpening a little bit, I bump up my contrast a little bit, and I bump up my saturation slightly. That is going to affect my preview image. So I did that because back in the day when I'd never set picture control, certain images looked out of focus, but they really just had no sharpening added, so they didn't look as good as they should have looked. So that's why I bumped that up now. Also, picture control is going to affect your video. So whatever you set your picture control to here is how it's going to affect your video, because you can't shoot RAW video. So it's kind of like JPEG video, but it's not JPEG video, it's real video, but it locks in your picture control. So be cognizant of that. I like to bump up the contrast slightly, the saturation, so that the vibrance of the image and the video pops. A word about monochrome. Do not shoot in monochrome. We have the ability now to record in color. You shoot in color, and then you can convert that later. If you shoot it in monochrome, you're throwing away all your color data, except if you're shooting RAW. That's why I don't recommend shooting, if you're shooting RAW, recommend shooting in monochrome, because you could just take out you could just switch it to black and white later. I wouldn't throw away that color information if you're shooting JPEG. Manage picture controls, so that means you could load and save them to different cameras. Auto distortion control off. I leave all those things off. I don't want the camera taking control of certain things that, I don't want it making corrections for most things. I set it to sRGB. I don't like using, it doesn't really matter. When you're shooting RAW, those two don't matter. Active D-lighting improves the level of details and highlights and shadows, or underexposed, whatever. I don't use D-lighting in the camera either. It basically shifts your histogram, your contrast, your saturations, and different things like that to try to give you more highlights and other things. So I worry about that when I'm processing my files. So we have long exposure noise reduction. I leave that off. You have high ISO noise reduction. I leave that on normal. That's one of the only things. Actually, you know what? I'm turning that off. I really don't want that. It's just, in high ISOs, I don't want it, because when you use the noise reduction, what it's doing is it's softening the image. You have better control doing that later if you really want to do it, in my mind, but I don't really want to do it, so I leave that off. ISO sensitivity. I leave off auto ISO. I don't want the camera selecting auto ISO. I don't want the camera saying that in one picture it's 200 and then in the next picture it's 2000. You should select your ISOs. You're smarter than the camera for that. So basically, you can set your ISO here. The lower the number, the more light you need. The higher the number, the lower light situation that you're going to be. But for those of you who don't know, the higher you go, the more artifacts or more grain or digital noise that you're going to see in your images. So be cognizant of that. Multiple exposures, I leave off. That's basically saying you can take one picture followed by another picture that's going to be on the same frame. So it's basically like taking two layers in Photoshop and sandwiching two pictures together, just doing it the old-fashioned way in the camera. That brings us to movie settings. So you have in the movie settings, you have 1920 by 1080, which at 24 frames a second at high quality, which is where I would leave it. If you're going to shoot anything, it's always best to shoot in the highest quality because you can't go from lower to higher, but you can go from higher to lower. So that's why I leave it on that. You can do 30 frames a second. That's more realistic to what we see day by day to day. 24 frames a second is more cinematic, so I like that feel. When you're shooting sports, you know, the faster frames per second will allow you to do better slow motion. There's a whole lot of other features in here, but I stick to the highest of the high. The microphone is auto. You can set the auto sensitivity to change the audio, which I like using if I'm not plugging a microphone in. Or you could have the microphone fully off if you don't want to pick up any of that extra data because you're using, because you don't need the audio. But if you plug a microphone in, this is something I didn't talk about through the door on this other side in the other video, is on the side of the camera you have the ability to plug in an external microphone. That's what sets apart this camera from the D3100 amongst many other things. But when you, I leave it on audio, I leave it on auto, I leave audio on auto sensitivity, and then when I plug in my microphone, my external microphone into this camera, it's going to basically keep those settings that are in the camera, in the microphone and pick up the recording. You have destination, that's where the video is going to go. That is, it tells you how many hours and minutes you have left for your recording. And manual movie mode, manual movie settings. I put this on. I want to change my exposures when I'm set in manual when doing video. Sometimes it's good to do that. It gives you the ability to tweak your video to a better setting where you think it's going to capture a better exposure. Intervalometer, so interval time shooting, I called it, it's intervalometer. You can set the camera up to shoot a picture every second, every minute, every hour for X amount of time. So that's something cool if you want to do time-lapse photography. So now we're going to go back here into remote control mode. So you have your different remote settings. The shutter is released 2 seconds after you press the shutter button is one option, or quick response mode is where I would put it. When I press the button, I want it to take a picture. I don't want it to wait 2 seconds. But those are the options that you have there for remote control, and that takes us through the shooting menu. Now into the custom setting menu. Yeah, this is a long video. There's a lot involved here. Autofocus. So you have your AFC priority selection. It's going to either release when you press the shutter button, whenever, even if it's not in focus, or it's going to wait until it's in focus to take the picture. Yep, only can be released to take the picture. That's something, because sometimes I think the camera may think that it's out of focus, but it may not be. So I leave it on release. For AFS priority mode, that I leave on focus. If when I'm shooting in single focus mode, if I am not locked in focus, I don't want it to shoot. Focus tracking while locking is on. So if you're tracking a subject running across the screen, the autofocus will continue to track that until it leaves the frame, or you're focused on, or until you're looking at something else for X amount of time. That's something you're going to want to play with to figure out which mode works for you. Focus point illumination. How the focus points are illuminated. On, focus points are always illuminated. I want my focus points on. That's what when you look through the viewfinder, that's the red square that you see. I want those on all the time to see where my focusing mode, or where I am focusing. So I always want to see that. So I leave that on. Let's see, focus point wrap on or off. When it's on, that means that if you keep pressing to the right, it's going to go through the 39 points and then wrap back around and start coming out the left, or from top, it's going to come out the bottom. I leave that on. That's a personal preference. Number of focusing points, you have the difference between 39 or 11. I leave it on 39 so I can independently select where I want to focus. If you want to focus the main areas, you can go to 11 focusing points. Built-in AF assist illuminator, I leave it off. When you turn it on, that light on the front of the camera will come on in low light situations where it thinks that you need to help focus your image. I leave it off personally. Live view mode, autofocus is autofocus follow, or AF full-time AF servo, which means it's going to focus for you, or single servo AF, where you focus it for you, where you focus the camera. You have different area modes to focus. You have, under live view movie AF, you have face priority, which is used to focus on a face or a portrait, and it's going to continue to follow it. A wider area AF, which is going to take the autofocusing from a larger area, or normal area AF, which focus on the subject in the selected focus point. Recommended when you're shooting on a tripod, so you can basically select closer to where you want it to focus. Subject tracking AF. What it says here is used to track a selected subject as it moves through multiple focus areas. That's an interesting one. You have to really play with these to figure out which works best for you in which situation. ISO sensitivity. Do you want it in half stops or do you want it in third stops? I like third stops because I can take it from, 1,000, let's see, where does it let me go? It's from 1,000 to 1,250 to 1,600 to 2,000 to 2,500 to 3,200 to 4,000. So it gives you increments. It gives you other places to shoot instead of just half stops. I don't want half stops. I want the most control as possible. What else could we skip here? Center weighted metering. So when you set your center weighted metering, it's where, whether it's going to take from a 6mm circle or an 8mm. I leave it on 8 because that's a pretty good area. Shutter button, AE lock, I have that off. So you have your auto meter on and off. This is just the different times for how long your meter stays on. Self timer, you can set it to 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds for really an X amount of number of shots, and intervals in between shots. You have that as well. Monitor off delay is just for turning off your monitor. So the beep, you have 3 options for beeps. A lower beep, a middle beep, and a higher beep. I leave mine on higher beep. I use, and a high pitch. There's a low pitch and a high pitch. I actually leave it on high pitch at the highest number, especially when I'm shooting shows. I can still sense that higher pitch when I'm shooting shows, and to make sure my focus is locked. I have trouble with my eyes being blurry, so I like to focus myself, or I like to leave that beep on so I can continue to focus. Viewfinder grid mode, you can leave it on or you can leave it off. ISO display adjustment, you can see it in your display. So we're going to skip through here even more. File number sequence. I leave this on. I don't want it to reset every time I put a new card in the camera or put the card back in the camera. I want it to continue to count 1 through 9,999, and then it starts back at 0 again. So I want it to continue. What else is important here? As we skip through this, modeling flash, auto bracketing. Let's see, OK button. Let's see, we keep moving through. Custom command dials. If you wanted to change what each dial did, you go there. Release button to use dial. What does this one mean? This option governs how settings. No, skip this one. Okay, so when the slot is empty, when you do not have a memory card in the camera, this is under F8 in your control settings. You don't want to shoot a picture if you don't have a card in the camera, so why leave it unlocked? Lock this. I always want to lock that if I don't have a card in the camera. And that takes us through that menu. Setup menu. So you have formatting your memory card. You can select which card you want to reformat, card 1 or card 2. Reformatting will totally wipe the card, so make sure you have all those images saved before you do that. Save user settings. If you have multiple cameras, you set up one camera and then you save that setting to the card and put it in another camera and load those savings onto another camera. So that's how you can basically get both cameras with the same information or the same setup. Image sensor cleaning, so you can clean your image sensor. I don't do this every time it's on or every time I turn the camera on, because I don't feel it needs to be done all the time, so I do it on occasions. Lock mirror up for cleaning. This is if you wanted to clean the image sensor manually if the auto cleaner doesn't work. You have your PAL setting and your NTSC. You set your time zones. Image comment. This is if you wanted to say copyrights, like I could say copyright Jared Polin, and then I would hit attach followed by done, which means that it would have whatever I typed in there saved onto every photo. Image rotation on, that means it will rotate the image for when you put it onto the computer. Battery info will show you how much battery, what's left on the camera for your battery, as well as the battery life, how much life is left if it's new or running down, and how many shots you took. Retouch menu, I stay out of, so I'm not even going over it because I don't want you guys doing anything in the camera I don't want corrections being made in the camera personally. And then you have my menu. So my menu is for, you can set the menu, important items that you use more often than not. You can set the camera to use these. You can use these menu settings. Wow, we've been talking a long time. So yeah, I leave that. I put in there battery info, clean image sensor, save user settings for that U1 and U2, which we didn't even get to. Where was that located? I must have skipped it. I am going to, well, we'll just do it from this area. And actually, we're going to find it. Is it in the shooting menu? Well, anyway, save user settings. This is where you would go to set your U1 and U2. It's, basically the way, when you set your camera and you go and you save it, it will ask you, do you want to save it to U1 or do you want to save it to U2? That's a great feature to have. I have my beep on in here and I have my ISO sensitivity. So now let's figure out how we change from, how we change the AFS, which is single focus, to continuous focus. You're going to press the button on the side of the camera that says AF. You're going to turn the back dial, and as you see on the screen, it goes from AFA to AFS to AFC. So it goes from continuous to AFA, which I always tell you stay out of auto, and to AF single. So single means you have to lock in your focus, and as long as your fingers press halfway down on the button, it's going to lock in your focus. Now when we go into continuous, as long as your finger is held halfway down on the shutter button, it's going to continue to focus. But how do we change between auto or 3D focus tracking or the 39, basically how do we change where the focus is, how it's going to track your focus, basically focus tracking. You turn the front dial. You can see we go from single point to 9 point to 21 point to 39 point to 3D to auto. And these are just different ways that focus tracking is going to be taken care of. To change the well, let's see where the quality is. So on the back of the camera, without going into menus, you can change your quality by pressing the quality button and turning the back dial, which then you can see on the screen the normal, basic, raw plus fine, raw plus normal, all the way back to raw, as well as how many pictures you have left on the camera. To change the ISO, you press the ISO button, you turn the back dial, you can see the ISO sensitivity changing. Press the white balance, you can see the white balance changing. And then you have your menu system. So now let's look at live view. So we're in live view. By holding down the focusing mode, you can change, you can see how AFS, AFF again, and that's by turning the back dial. When you turn the front dial, you're changing your focusing modes from wide to normal to tracking to portrait. You see all the information on the screen. By hitting info, it takes the info off the screen. You have a grid, you have a virtual horizon, and then you have the grayed out area. I leave on the grayed out area so you can see exactly what you'd be shooting, because outside of this grayed out area, it's not 16, it's in a 16:9 ratio, and you won't get any of that information recorded there. So you can see how you can change those different settings, and that's live view. To replay your pictures, you press the play button, and here you can see the picture with the detailed information of how it was shot, and you can cycle through and see where it was focused, and if it's locked or unlocked, and more detail. To play back a video, you go to a video, you press the OK button, and it starts playing back that video. So that is the extensive run through of the Nikon D7000 and the menu systems. I know, watch it once. If you stuck through this the whole time, thank you. Really, that's everything in that camera, or it's quite a lot of things. So I hope you like that. I'm tired after doing that. I'm glad I only have to do it once. Hopefully, as long as everything recorded. So that's it. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the camera. Keep shooting raw. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.